So today, I'd like to actually go over how to set up and shoot chroma key. That's where we're going to start. We got a lot of stuff to do today, but that's sort of the plan. I want to start there, and then we will take a look at any work in progress files that you have regarding your final project. There's a link that I just put into the as an announcement for our class that you can go to when we get to that part, but that's where the link will be, and we'll do it via a Zoom room call. So anyway, I do want to talk about doing setting up and shooting chroma key. A lot of times I'll do this in the studio. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to actually set that up. I don't even know if there's space in the studio to be able to do that right now. However, I use a program called Satellite that is a pretty extraordinary software program that you can emulate studio lighting, and that I'll show. If you don't know the program and you're ever interested in trying it out, we've got quite a few licenses here at Columbia, and I'd be more than happy to give you a license so that you can actually play around with it. But anyway, so that's where we're going to start. And it basically starts like this. What you're looking at right here, I'm going to sort of give you a tour around this part right here. This is basically a studio that's got a green seamless up on one wall. If we zoom out of the studio, you can sort of see all I've got right in here right now is a camera. And that's basically how we're going to start out this whole process. So the idea about shooting green screen, and you guys have done enough of mine to know right now, the ultimate goal in doing green screen is to get an extremely even color green, and this applies to blue screen as well, but a completely even tone of green with no variation. So the holy grail, and it's an impossibility, but the holy grail in this should always be that you want to achieve a single color pure green on the background, and that there's no variation in tone. It's just this one pure color. Because that way, if you can actually just make a selection of then that color, it's extremely simple, your knockout works, and you're off to the races. So this is the way that I set it up to shoot on it to make it as easy as I can possibly do it. The first thing that I start out with, and I'm going to turn on just a main beauty dish light so that we can actually see. What you're looking at here in this window right over here is the room, and what we're looking over here is what you're actually seeing in the camera. And you can see in the camera one of the problems that we actually have in doing this is that we see the floor. Basically, we're going to see the floor with this green background. And that becomes a problem for us. So even if you were to carry the sweep out onto the floor, so if I was to bring the sweep out here onto the floor, the problem we have there is that the way light bounces off this background is completely different than the way it bounces off the floor. Now you guys probably instinctively know that every time that you go into the studio and you set up like a seamless background and you shoot just a single umbrella onto one side or something like that, you shoot a picture, the background always ends up being brighter than the floor. And the reason that is that light is actually, if we put a light, well, even like this light right here, if we put this light right here, it's actually going to bounce off of the background and straight back to the camera. Unlike what happens to the floor, when the light hits the floor, it does not come back to the camera. The light hits the floor and actually then hits the background and then comes back to the camera. So your floors are always darker. It's a problem that we do whenever we're doing knockout. Anyway, when we're doing any of that stuff. So the solution to doing this is to avoid using the floor altogether, and that's what I'm going to do. The other thing that is a problem with this is that if you actually do this as a seamless with a cove and the cove comes out, the cove inevitably has, I'm sure you guys have noticed this, there's always a dark stripe that goes across part of the cove, and there's also, it's much less obvious, but there's always also a white stripe that goes across the cove. Have you guys noticed that? There's always this darker area, lighter area. So you're not going to see this on the video, but you will hear the recording. I'm going to do something on the whiteboard right here to explain what it is that's happening and tell you guys how to fix it. because again, it's a problem that we run into all the time in doing this kind of, in doing work on seamless. So it's just a nice thing to know because you're going to run into it your whole life. So the first thing that we need to talk about is wave interference. Don't let that freak you out. This isn't going to be a math class or a physics class. Can you guys see? Let me turn on. So most of you, I'm going to go out on a limb and say all of you know that light is actually has properties of particles. It also has property of waves, but we typically think of light as waves. Color is wavelength, that kind of stuff. So we need to talk about what happens when waves interact with one another. And so I'm going to draw a single wave out here on the top. And so we would just call this a single light wave. It doesn't really matter what color it is, just a single light wave. But now I'm going to introduce a second light source that's also going to put out a light wave. And those two light waves are going to interact in one of two ways. So this is what happens. So the first one that I could send out is going to be what we call the opposite phase of this. So meaning whenever this light wave starts to move up, the other light wave starts to move down. And what ends up happening here, this would be the 0 point where light's actually starting, and then again, this would be a positive direction, this would be a negative direction, but nonetheless, what happens is that when these two waves, so one wave by itself, forget the one on the bottom, you see light. One wave on the top, you see light. But when these two things are in phase, in this particular phase pattern together, they cancel each other out. So what you end up having is a straight line. You end up killing the wave essentially altogether because the peak of the positive here is canceled by the peak of the negative. The peak of the moving in a negative direction is canceled by the positive part right here. These two things cancel each other out and you end up with no light. Does that make sense? So that's one option. The other option and the other phase that we can do is it's actually in phase and it's moving at the same formation as our original light wave, and it looks like this. Sorry, let me get a marker that works. And what happens in this one is that everybody adds each other. So instead of the wave, the first one we had that was canceling everybody out that went along like this now doubles the amplitude. And the resulting wave is this. It's a giant one. It's much, much, much brighter. Does that make sense to everybody, what I'm sort of talking about? So you can just think of it as that, again, sort of imagine, well, you guys, are there any questions? Does this sort of somewhat make sense? So what happens in seamless, when you do a cove, so I'm going to do my cove. Wish me luck. Third marker. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. This is a cove from the side. Okay, so imagine we're on the side looking at the cove. Seamless is hanging down, right? So you have light that's actually hitting the cove like this and bouncing back. But you've also got light that's actually hitting the floor and bouncing up into the cove as well. When these two go into phase, like we just looked at, what you end up with, they call it destructive and constructive interference. Destructive interference causes a dark line that usually happens right about here to go across the seamless. The one that most people don't notice is usually somewhere right above it is a much brighter spot on your seamless. You'll also see that line go across. And it's because these two things have been, the way you've set this up, they're in phase. Does that make sense? To create destructive and constructive to get rid of this, you change the shape of the cove. So what most people will do is create, pull the cove much further out. So you would do something like this instead. So again, I'm pulling the line out. It's nowhere near as sharp. And this way what ends up happening is the light waves will still interact with one another, but not necessarily in phase with one another to be destructive or constructive. So whenever you see that line, that's the solution. Questions? I need to avoid that in doing green screen. Again, that's going to create a darker shadow area on my green and a much lighter area on my green. I want to get rid of that. So to get rid of it, I build up a platform so that I don't see it. So I'm going to add my platform right here. It's just a box. But you can see now when you're looking through the screen, this is again my lens over here, when you can see now what's happened is I see the top of the box. That's all I really see here, and then it goes immediately to green. Now, people are going to stand on that box, which is fine. I may have problems doing a little bit of outlining around it. You guys have already done the same thing. The girl with the red coat, you guys remember knocking that out? She was standing on a platform, and you guys used either overlay brushes or the pen tool to actually knock her feet out. It's just a standard. There is a reason that I actually use black down here instead of green, and it's because of spill. You don't want any spill to actually come up on top of the girl. So if the floor of the box is green, your front light will actually hit that, and it'll actually kick green up onto the figure, and then you've got a spill situation that you've got to deal with. So I don't get that much more out of it. The only reason that you might be worried about the box itself is, or the surface of the box would be, if you had like really furry boots, or really, a boot that has like hair texture to it, or a shoe that has like hair texture to it, that would be really difficult to knock out any other way. And at that stage of the game, you might consider covering the top of the box with green. But at any rate, so then I'm going to put my person on there. And so this is basically my setup right here. Again, you can sort of see in the screen right here. I'll swap these to make this seem a little bit bigger. So this is basically what I'm looking at. Is simply girl, again, figure, it doesn't have to be girl, figure, whatever the figure is, on that box, camera set so that I have green in the background, and then it's basically filling my frame. Now, if we actually zoom out, sorry, trade back again. Some of you guys, when you've been setting up stuff in the studio, I've actually been seeing is that you're using extremely wide-angle lenses for background seamless. It's only 9 feet wide. If you do not have enough space, if you keep falling off the background, you do not have enough background. The trick to it is, or the solution to it is to back up and use a longer lens. This lens that I've got here right now is the 70 to 200, and it's almost at the 70 part, but nonetheless, I can't really show it to you on this, but nonetheless, that's what you would actually do. The longer the lens you go to, the more compression you get between your subject and your background, and therefore the background ends up being larger. If any of you guys have ever gone out and shot as the sun is setting over the ocean or something like that, the longer the lens you use, the bigger the sun ball actually becomes, and it will actually fill your frame. Again, it's a trick that people have used forever. So if you don't have enough background, go to a longer lens. Most of you know right off the bat, if you have an extremely short lens, let's say you put on a 27 millimeter lens and you were standing right in front of that girl, there's no way that background would be covering your entire frame. So at any rate, this is where I'm basically going to start. Next thing I see a lot of people do, and mistake that I see a lot of people make, is that they set up all their lights to begin with first. What's the most important light to set up in this rig? Figure or background? Anyone? I don't have background lights on here yet, but isn't your figure light your key light? Isn't it the most important light there is? Your main light? If all of a sudden my background was too light or too dark and I wanted to change the relationship, would I change my key light? Would I change the light on the figure? Oh yeah, you got the background, looks great, but the girl is 2 stops underexposed. That would never happen, right? Your key light's your main light. It's the one you set up and you meter it out first. Why do you meter it out first? Because it has an impact on the background. I'm going to turn mine off right now and look, the whole scene in my viewfinder goes away. So when I turn it on, it's actually hitting it's hitting the girl and the background as well. Now, one of the issues with this program that makes it difficult to actually do exposure is that there is no built-in light meter that's actually in this program. However, I need everybody to do this really quickly. Go to your application folder. Again, this is only for Macintosh people. Go to your application folder, go to your utilities folder, and inside of that there's a utility called Digital Color Meter. If you double click on this thing will open up and it will give you a readout in various versions of light spaces. I put mine in Adobe RGB because it's basically the easiest one to work in. You'll see that you get a readout for RGB and it is sticky. This thing will like lay on top of anything, so you can actually get some sense of what is actually the display that you're actually getting on this. So the value that we're getting on this. So when I'm actually in this space, I actually go to my, this is the lens view in here, and this is showing me exactly what would happen if the lens actually, if the strobe had actually fired. What we're seeing here is just ambient light. What we're seeing, so this is the room view, we're just seeing ambient light, but in the film view, in the camera view, this is actually, the strobe is now gone off. This would be like the preview that you would actually get in Capture One. So if we actually take our color digital meter right here, I can actually hover it over the highlight on this girl's skin, and what does that tell me? What that's telling me is that none of you guys have remembered all the great tricks that are going to turn you into a killer assistant or a killer digital tech, get you a job in a great studio where you'll meet all sorts of people, become rich and famous, and live the life that you've always wanted to live. Or you didn't listen to me and you end up being a server at Starbucks for the rest of your life. Well, which one do you want? Yeah. Remember, we've talked about proper exposure would be the R channel on Caucasian skin highlight, giving you a red value, channel value alone between 225 and 245. What's mine in this? 235. Perfect exposure. There's other tricks that you can do on that. I just wanted to point this part out. So this is where you have to start, and the reason we also, this matters is that this light is going to hit the background. Now I've got to light the background as well, but I don't want to do the background first and then add this light and have it add more light to the background, which means that I have to relight the background. So again, the order in which you do this makes sense. We good on this part? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, trade back again, is we need to worry about spill happening on this. So to fix, well, I take it back. Let's go ahead and light the background lights first. So in doing the background lights, you put them at 45-degree angles to the sides, and you gel them. Now this is a great trick you use to saturate any color. If you are in the studio and you want hyper-saturated color, the trick to it is that gel your lights with the same color of background that you're actually trying to do. So you'll see that this is a green background, and if I zoom into these lights, sorry, you can see they have green gels on them. I'm going to do a top-down view so you can sort of see what's going on, although it's really hard to see in that top-down view, so let me do the top-down view here. So in the top-down view, what you can actually see, this guy actually moved, so hang on one second. So this is straight looking down on top of this. Let me hide a couple of other things really quickly, and we'll be close to being done. So what you've got is this set of strobes right here points at this edge over here on this side. This set of strobes right here points at this edge on this side. You cross the two to get even light. If you had these strobes pointed at this side right here and these pointed at this side right here, you would have hot edges and a weak middle, but by completely crossing them, you actually end up with a much more even light on the background. The gels that you use matter, as does the color seamless that you use matter. So all of this is in a PDF in the resources for week number 11. That's how to set up chroma key. It will give you the color of seamless green that it is. It's a very specific one. It's not just any green. And also the color gels. They are designed only for chroma key green screen. They are also specialized gels. So don't go in there thinking you can just whip up any color seamless, green seamless, and any color green gels. It's really designed. It's a system that's designed to actually make this part work. So that's my setup right now, but the problem now that I've got is if I look at this, I've actually got these green lights right here are going to hit my model. They will spill onto my model. So I need to actually set up a situation to keep this green spill from hitting her. So to do that, you add cards all the way around her. And again, these are just pieces of foam core. If you have a studio that has a black ceiling, you don't need to worry about this black top right here. But if you had a studio that had a gray ceiling, you can see all the light that's hitting around it. It's hitting the floor, it's hitting the top, it's hitting everything. That all becomes light sources for spill. So by surrounding her in black, I'm actually able to get rid of that part. So then I'm going to actually, so this is basically the setup. Are there any questions about this part? So once you get this set up, this is what it ultimately looks like. This is the first image. So we're now into capture 1. This would be the first image that I would actually shoot. And again, what I'm just trying to do is determine if the exposure on her is correct. Again, because I don't have a light meter that I can stick in here or a white card, I can actually use that exposure trick, highlight on Caucasian skin, R channel only, and you can see I'm in that 235, 236 range right over there. That indicates this is proper exposure. If we look at the background though, you'll actually see I've got a luminosity that's roughly in the 70s, 80s, something like that. I'm not really concerned about color here. I'm concerned about the brightness that's back here. And this is why the brightness part actually concerns, well, I'll show you. Hang on one second. If we go back to the very beginning of this class, seems like a year or two ago, doesn't it? At what brightness is saturation its greatest based on this? Anyone? Clearly, we don't remember that when brightness increases, so again, saturation is the distance from the center point right here out to what we would call the equator. If we imagine this is like the Earth, a globe, saturation increases as you push out. However, as you start to get brighter, you lose saturation, and as you start to get darker, you also lose saturation. So the most saturated color that you can get is a brightness of middle gray, 128 in our scale of 255. So that's what I'm looking for here in my Capture 1. I don't want this dark tone down here because it's not as saturated. So in this case, the only lights that are on are the front lights. So is the main key light. I'm going to turn this part on. This is now turned on, those 4 background lights that have the green gel on them. And you can see I'm looking at my brightness range up in here, and I've got like a 156, I've got 157 on here. I'm pretty even all the way around. A perfect middle gray would be 128. That's extremely difficult to get, that perfect amount. But I want to be closer in this range, and I want, again, as I move around here, I don't want to see a radical shift in numbers. So I'm going from a low down here of 135 to a hot up here, probably around a 152. That's a 10-point range on a scale of 255. That's actually extremely well done, extremely smooth. But this is what I was talking to you guys about the saturation part. I'm going to actually drop the exposure on this and watch what happens. So you see how saturated that green is. As you start to pull your exposure down, you lose all saturation. As you start to crank exposure up, you also lose all saturation. So that's why you're looking to stick this stuff right in the middle. So then we do 2 tests, and the 2 tests that we're actually looking for are this. I'm actually going to look at this image with no front light on, and I'm going to zoom into this. And what I'm looking for is spill. And you can see there's a little bit in this hair right here, good clean edges along here, all of this kind of stuff, a little bit on the fingers you can see. But basically, for the most part, I've eliminated the vast majority of the spill that I would need to worry about. This figure should be in silhouette. And then the other image that you want to actually look at is the one that has only got the foreground light on, and this is this one right here. What you're concerned about is, are you casting shadow from your figure onto this background? Because if you are, getting that background to be that light even green is an incredibly difficult challenge. Does this make sense to everyone what's going on? I'm also on this part right here, this image right here. When I look on the left-hand side here, I get a sort of a reading in this range right here in the 80s. On my other side over here, it's in the low 70s. It's actually still pretty even, so we're in pretty good shape. Chroma key in a nutshell. Does this make sense to everyone? Questions about this part? All right. So at this stage of the game, I would like to actually look at work. If you've actually got anything to show, will you please log into that Zoom room? I'm going to go ahead and start this. I'm going to pause the video recording.